Now, this is the kind of forced labor I'm talking about, right, me? Damn right. The last Clockwinder is an endearing game. It's a nice amount of chill that you can go deeper into if you really want that extra challenge, but the game doesn't really ask that much of you in order to see what it has to offer. This is a VR automation-based puzzle game that is centered around the mechanic that you record a several second loop of yourself performing an action, and a robot will spawn in place to repeat your actions. From there, you'll create a series of clones for yourself to carry out a series of tasks in order to produce fruit. The premise of the story is that there's a giant tree that acts as a nursery for all sorts of unique plants. Some plants mean something to people, and others are just rare. It's basically a giant plant archive. This place is run by the Clockwinder, which is probably the dumbest job title ever, because winding the clock is apparently the last thing you should do in this position, for reasons. And the clock they refer to isn't even a goddamn clock in the first place. But the current Clockwinder has suddenly disappeared, leaving only a signal behind that someone who previously spent time with a usually isolated Clockwinder decides to investigate. From there, you work towards fixing the place up as you uncovered what happened to the Clockwinder through a series of recorded messages that mostly consist of conversations between the main character as a child and the Clockwinder. Because apparently she must have grown a cassette tape plant, seeing as how she recorded every single random conversation on cassette. Even something as silly as a conversation of the little girl complaining there's not enough salt in the food. The dialogue is overall fine. It walks a good line between playful and silly without being annoying, for the most part. So the entire game takes place in a singular room. You have a control panel on the back that allows you to change the destination, but all it really does is lower the middle section of the room and bring up another. This is how all the different puzzles are handled. It's a presentation that it's simple and pretty cheap than something a few other VR games have done, but I kind of enjoy it because it kind of reminds me of a stage play. Just sitting by and watching as the environment shifts around a bit to introduce new scenes, it looks cool. My favorite part is the in-between chapter conversations where most of the room goes dark and all you really see that's illuminated is the main stage and the robots as they kind of just work away while the characters talk. Actually kind of brought back memories of watching stage plays a very long time ago. But as for the puzzles themselves, I found the mechanic to be pretty fun to mess with overall, especially when trying to do everything not just efficiently, but also stupidly. I'll continue to take every opportunity I can to act like a moron, and VR is still giving me plenty of chances to do so. Making a yeet veyor belt where all the robots just chuck fruit across the room at each other, followed by dabbing, never gets old. Or this puzzle where I try to chuck this fruit at a falling water drop like it's a shuriken, and then throw it to the other me who slices it out of the air with a knife. One detail about setting up your puzzles that I really enjoy is that this game has a dynamic soundtrack based on the amount of clones you have. It feels great to just start in a silent room, slowly building up your chain of clones as the music starts to convey more and more that feeling of a bustling workshop. Every puzzle area seems to have different music too, which is really cool. It doesn't always sound great admittedly, but it's a really good touch. You especially will feel this difference when you have to reset a whole puzzle and one by one delete your clones as the music dies down into silence. So messing around with the puzzle mechanic is something that really didn't get old, which is something I wish I could say about the core mechanic itself. That's not to say that it was bad or I just didn't care about it by the end, but it had a few problems that would really get in the way if this game was longer. The first one being that the puzzle solving mechanic never really changes, ever. The only alteration you get to this mechanic is that you unlock the ability to choose how long the recording lasts from one of 3 settings. Admittedly, I rarely found use for this simply because the majority of this game felt like it was timed so well with the default setting, save for one or two obstacles, and if you start a puzzle with one timing, it feels like it's rarely worth it to make clones later down the line have longer or shorter timings, since shorter recordings will cause it to miss, and longer recordings just means you have to do more work to match the shorter cycles. Thankfully, the puzzles themselves have some nice variety, it's just the main mechanic that I would have liked to see change a little bit more. As for what you have to deal with, there are 5 types of fruits that you interact with and they all function differently. You have the very standard blusher, which is a normal object you grab and throw. The bombberry is a fruit that you can't hold onto directly for too long, so you have to either juggle it or quickly throw it. The dewdrop can't be grabbed directly at all, so you gotta attach it to stuff, and it's also flung off the plant like a slingshot. The badger tail is a slower growing fruit that has to be cut with a knife, but after that it functions like a normal fruit. Then lastly you have the Luft apple, which will constantly float upwards and can't be grabbed directly, but you can manipulate it with your hands, allowing you to sort of grab it by cupping your hands on top of it. Some other mechanics they introduce are fruit connectors, where in some areas you have to make fruit molecules to be squeezed in order to make seeds, so you have to stab a fruit with a double-ended connector to create chains of fruits, and depending on the puzzle it'll ask you to make more and more complex molecules to solve the puzzle. The rest of the variation is handled with the stage layout or any gimmicks it has, like one room where the dewdrops are shot out of a pipe instead of grown on plants, or this room where you have to grab lily pads in order to bounce the dewdrops into a giant funnel. I'm kinda glad some of these mechanics only happen once in a room and never again, because this one in particular was an example of one of the lesser enjoyable ones. Overall, they are pretty good though. Thankfully, it does manage to stay fresh throughout the game with its limited mechanics. It's also helped by the fact that this game is not very long. Yeah, admittedly for $25 this game might not be the best deal depending on how you play it. I got about 9 to 11 hours out of it, accounting for some potential idling because of life stuff, but that's also mostly because I not only tried to do stupid stuff, which required a huge amount of trial and error in setting up each individual puzzle, but I also tried to do it while getting the highest rating in each room, which I admittedly gave up on because this puzzle mechanic is not very retry friendly. Every room gives you a key to the next area. The cost of progression in each area is extremely modest, so you don't even need to have that efficient of a production line. And to top it all off, if you don't care about the achievements, there's really no reason not just to make everything use a metric shitload of robots. There is absolutely no resource limitation on how many robots you can just plonk down, outside of maybe the game just stopping you because it's about to crash. Usually what I did was solve a puzzle efficiently first, and then retool it slightly after the fact to make it convoluted as hell, because that shit is fun. So when I said this game wasn't retry friendly, the reason being is that the timing is so incredibly specific to how each of your clones move. If you want to tweak something, even slightly, you have to change every clone that comes after it. Which can be fun, but because you then have to act everything out again, and that throwing is very frequently expected for efficiency since clones can't move at all, you'll spend a lot of time just sitting there throwing an object over and over until you get just the right arc that you need. Not only that, there's no real way to make minor adjustments to things. You can't slightly move something over for the few times it would actually work, you can't slightly delay an action in the middle of it. The only answer is to redo the entire thing. You can't even mass reset the clones, which is another annoyance. You have to walk up to each individual clone, give it a head pat, tell it everything's gonna be okay before you remove it from existence. This made one rare issue I encountered that little bit extra annoying. 99% of the time, the physics in this game is extremely consistent. Throwing things from across the room will play out the same way every time, and that's actually really cool because of how much can go wrong with physics usually. But one issue I saw maybe 2 or 3 times in very specific places is that the clones sometimes wouldn't play their full range of motion of an action, and it would do this pretty consistently in those specific situations, so I'd have to go and redo most of the puzzles to account for this. Like, sometimes it would work and other times the clone would just miss entirely. I really couldn't figure out why, and despite how chill this game was, it was probably the most frustrated I've been in a while just because of how out of my control the situation was. So in the end, there actually aren't that many puzzles in the game. There's only about 25 puzzle rooms. Most of the time spent was simply doing the busy work of getting the puzzles just right with the right amount of stupid. So when I said I got about 9 to 11 hours out of this game, You could probably do the whole thing in about 5 hours if you just did the bare minimum, or didn't attempt to be efficient at all and used a ton of clones to remove all the trial and error. That, and also not being a complete moron who's trying to pretend he's an anime-ass ninja while creating endless cycles of forced labor. While I did spend a lot of this video so far talking about the problems this game has, that's only because the good parts of this game are pretty straightforward. Overall, it's a really nice and endearing game to relax with. You can take it as serious or as chill as you want, be as stupid or straightforward as you want. It's kind of a gimmick in the end with how little the mechanic is really fleshed out, but it's also something you can't really do without VR, so in the end, I found the novelty to still go pretty strong for me.